Not at this time. I'll hold off for data update later with Dia.
Great, thank you. Beth, have you got any updates?
I said no, I don't. Thank you.
David, have you got an update?
Just that years ago, Dwight Lewis and I were colleagues at the Tennessean, so I'm delighted to see that he was appointed co-chair of the committee today. That was terrific news.
Demetria.
Sorry, guys. Every week my link doesn't work, but I'm here now. Thank you. No update.
Great. Reggie, have you got an update for us?
No, at this point, I don't have an update, but I'm like Mr. Fox. I'm ready to welcome our new guest in. I've known him for a long time as well, so I'm looking forward to him.
Great. Sabina, have you got a check-in for us?
Hey, how are y'all doing? No, no update right now.
Okay, great. Whitney, have you got an update for the committee?
Nothing to share at this time. I'm just excited about today's meeting and the guests, so I think it should be pretty interesting.
I think we are still waiting on Mr. Lewis to join us. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes, but he might come in on. I think if not, we can keep on proceeding.
Okay, great. Dia, have you got any check-in you'd like to share with us?
Other than what's on the agenda? Nope, not at this time. Good to see everyone.
Great. And I see that Mac has just joined us. Mac, have you got any check-in for the committee?
Okay, I'm good. Good morning. Hello, everybody. Hello.
All right, so up first is Metro Nashville PD Deputy Chief Kay Loki. She's got some important updates for us. Chief Loki, if you'll give us those updates. Thank you. On mute.
I think Gremlins put us on mute. I really do. All right. Thank you for letting me butt in. I know that you got a lot ahead on your agenda, but since we met, I think it was September 14th, we've got a lot of interesting things going on, and I just kind of wanted to bring you up to date. We are going to increase our background and recruitment unit. We're going to bring on 4 additional sworn officers. And our goal is to try to make that a diverse group of individuals to reflect our community better. People that we are considering and vetting is a female Hispanic that has worked before with our recruiting process, so she's very familiar with it. And then we have an African-American gentleman that is always ready to help us. So those are 2 additional folks. And then I have a officer, a female white officer, that came up to me and said, what can I do for the department? I've been in patrol for 15, 16 years. What more can I do? And her heart's in it. So she's being looked at. And then we have another officer, Bill Fox, who he's a good addition. He's out there when we're doing our physical ability test, and he's given up his time to help us. So 3 additional folks. So the makeup of our unit consists of the lieutenant, who is a male white, and then, let me find my phone. My mom's calling, sorry. Lieutenant, who's a male white, and then our sergeant, who's an African American, and then the 4 additional officers. Really excited about this group of folks. I'm really excited to see what they can do. I'll be speaking with our IT department, because my goal is to use our website in a better way. And I would really like for us to be able to create an interest card where someone that just visited our website, looks at the MMPD, will say, hey, we noticed you visit our site. Would you please leave us a contact? And then have an officer call them back. I know when I looked at the process, I was intimidated. And just to have that helping hand, that extension, I'm going to start talking to everybody about, we need to act like we're recruiting for sports. You know, what can we do to get you here? Because we're number one. So a little change of mentality. The one thing that I am excited about the most is we're going to revamp the physical agility test. For years, we've done a test that I think eliminates women at a bigger rate than what we should be experiencing. It's going to be more of a job performance-based agility test. We're looking at what California does. They've been doing it since 1970, so they have probably been attacked and been able to stand up in court and shown that this is good, solid test for police standards. It's going to consist of a wooden fence that we will have to jump over, a chain link fence, which is not uncommon, what we might have to do. I never did that as a police officer, but I hear it's done. And then a zigzag, kind of like running through cars on a foot chase. And then you're going to pull a dummy a certain amount of feet, and then you're going to finish it with a 50-meter run. It's a pass or fail, and you're scored on how quickly you can do these things. And it's been proven that as you get into the academy, we can still test you on these, and there's still room for improvement for folks. So, and then when you make it through the hiring process and you're in the academy, there's an element of stress that we put the trainees through. We're going to re-examine this just a little bit more. I've always liked the adult learning model. I'm going to treat you like an adult, so when you go out in the community, you're going to act like an adult. But we do have to do some stress, because not everybody wants to treat everybody like an adult. And if we come across somebody that, you know, wants to buck up or wants to have an argument with, we have to show that we can perform and conduct our business under stressful circumstances. Less emphasis on stress, more emphasis on adult study learning module. So those are the big changes we've got going on now. There's some other ones that are just starting to take effect, and I don't want to really go into a lot of it right now, but I thought you needed to know that moving forward. Okay. Questions?
Madam Chair, this is Gary Moore. I don't have a question, but I did want you to know I'm on the call.
Great. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Chief Loki. I think these are all really great steps forward. When do you think that these 4 new folks will come into your unit? Do you have a target date for that?
Yes. I put in the request last week. I think by the middle of October, we can probably get these folks. I want you to be aware that we're going to be pulling from all over the department, but this is how important it is to us. The physical agility test, we hope we'll have implemented the end of October, 1st of November, but there's a lot of work that goes into that, because folks are training for what we have now in place. So we need to slowly gear people into, you know, how to jump over that fence, how to zigzag pull. So we got to give folks time to rethink their training and their ability.
That's great. And I had just one other question. Are you currently in the hiring I know you're always sort of in the hiring process, but do you have a target date for your next academy class to start?
Yes, February 16th.
Okay, great. And do you, would your hope be to get these new guidelines in place prior to that class starting?
That is not a hope, it's gonna happen. I have put that to everybody. And we have in the current class, which is 63 individuals right now, we have kind of changed some of our standards, some of our ways of interacting with the recruits. We're just gonna make it standard procedure.
Okay, great. Demetria.
I'm sorry, Margie, I missed the date. It was February
16th.
16th.
Yes.
And will you still be doing the police diversity training?
Yes, yes.
Awesome.
Chief Loki, I was just curious, what part of the physical agility was knocking women out at higher numbers?
Push-ups. I'm not a fan of push-ups either. Most women have lower body strength, so they usually can do the running, part of it. But the push-ups were a problem for women. And again, we don't expect people to come in to be police officers. We want to train you to be a police officer. So we'll get you to that standard of push-ups. We'll get you to where you need to be. But right now I want to know, what could you do at a minimum that's police related?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, anybody else have any questions for Chief Loki? I think these sound like exciting changes. We appreciate you contacting us to come back on and give us an update on that. Thank you so much.
Still looking forward for you. So we're going to make some good things happen. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief. Okay, the next, do we have Mr. Lewis on the call?
Madam Chair, I'm trying to figure out who Mayor Policing Policy is. I'm not sure, that might be Dwight or whoever that person is. Can you announce yourself, please? I'm saying somebody's name, Mayor Policing Policy. If you can just tell me who you are.
This is Dwight Lewis.
Welcome, Mr. Lewis. We're so glad you're here. I just wanted to say a few words about you. Mayor Cooper is so pleased that you have been able to step into the position originally occupied by Judge Dinkins. He is recovering from a health incident, and we could really not have anyone better prepared by virtue of experience, insights, and skills to be helping Mayor Dean with this process than Mr. Lewis. I'm sure that almost all of you know him. For 40 years, he worked as a reporter at the Tennessean, then an editorial page editor and columnist, has been just someone who is engaged with the challenges of policing and race here in Nashville from the very beginning of his career. He's thought very deeply about this, and Mayor Cooper is very grateful to have his assistance as the committees begin to turn towards recommendations and look towards producing reports. So thank you so much, Mr. Lewis, for being part of this. Committee chairs, you'll also have a chance to meet Mr. Lewis in person on Wednesday. He's going to be joining the chair and vice chair lunch with Mayor Dean that day.
Fantastic. Mr. Lewis, this is Margie Quinn and Whitney Washington, the chairs of the committee. Would you like to address the committee at this time?
No more than to say I'm honored to join you all, and I look forward to working with you. And I have your mission statement in front of me, and that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We're thrilled to have you as part of this work. Moving on, we have two subject matter experts on the call with us. We have the author Radley Balco, and we have MNPD Fraternal Order of Police President James Smallwood. And what I'd like to do is get each of them to just speak for just a few minutes about their experiences, their knowledge of policing. Our particular committee is to address recruiting, a little bit of hiring, promotion, retention, and culture. And so we have been pretty good so far, at least this committee has, of really sticking to those particular issues. And so, Mr. Balco, I'd love to yield the floor to you and have you talk about the book and the research that you have done.
Madam Chair, I believe he fell off the call.
Did he fall off? Okay. Well, then we will turn it over to President Smallwood. James, if you'll kick us off.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, sorry that you guys have to endure me kicking off instead of somebody who's probably a lot better of a public speaker. But, and much like Deputy Chief Loki, I have a very strong disdain for push-ups. So I'm happy to hear that we'll be looking for alternative methods of fitness. Thank you all first in the committee for taking the time and putting in the effort for what you're doing. Law enforcement is facing challenges like we've never seen before, and having served on commissions and committees, I certainly understand all the time, effort, and commitment that comes along with your role. So just want to thank you for taking the time to do this and having a role in the future of law enforcement in Nashville, and hopefully we can come with some good improvements for our department to help with recruitment and retention and salaries. You know, everybody knows, it's no secret, it's a very challenging time to be in law enforcement right now. Probably one of the most challenging that I've seen in my 11-year career here with the Metro Nashville Police Department. It's interesting. We all took this job because we loved our communities, because we loved our fellow humans, and we wanted to step in and make the world a better place and just have opportunities to help when nobody else could, when we felt like we couldn't. And unfortunately, given some viral incidents that have taken place across the country, we've gone from public partners to, in some eyes, public enemy number one. And we still come in every day. Thank God we have some really noble people working this profession. They come in every day to serve their communities, and they still have that mission at heart to help and make the world a better place. But it's no mystery. Applications are down, I think, 64%. Retention is increasingly problematic for our department and departments across the country. I checked earlier right before this meeting, and we are 136 officers short in the role of police officer 2. And that would be the officer that comes to your home and answers your call when you pick up the phone and say, I need help. We are down 136, which is a huge deficiency for us. And to just kind of give you a picture, we have approximately just shy of 400 officers in our Community Services Bureau that answer calls on a routine basis, day-to-day calls for service. So think of that number and then take away over 130. That's how far behind we are in the curve. And that's just due to the nature of policing today. It's due to working conditions. It's due to salaries and benefits. And all these things combined globally have made officers make that conscious decision that they're going to find something else to do. And I had the benefit of just briefly speaking with the chair earlier. And I want to mention also, it's not just the officers. We all have somebody at home who loves us, who's waiting on us to come home, who's waiting on us to make that phone call at the end of the shift to say, I'm okay, I'm on my way home, I'll be there soon. You know, we have spouses who lay in bed at night and wait to hear that Velcro ripping from our ballistic vest to know that we're home safe. And they're seeing the same things on television day in and day out. They're seeing the same things in the media. And it's families now that are telling their spouses, we can't handle the stress anymore. We can't handle worrying about you out there in the street. We need to find something else to do. So it's incumbent on this committee, it's incumbent on our city to recognize the role law enforcement plays in our community, to recognize how important we are and how important it is to make sure that salaries and working conditions and benefits are all up to par so that we can continue to retain and recruit the best and brightest candidates. And I know you all have a lot of questions. I am happy to answer anything that you may have. I don't want to sit up here and just talk to you. That doesn't do you any good. I want to hear from you and answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Madam Chair, excuse me.
And that's okay. I don't think we've got Radley on yet. Is that correct?
I don't
I
think so.
I just called in. I'm on the phone. I couldn't, for some reason, I haven't been able to connect.
Okay, great. This is Margie Quinn and Whitney Washington. We're the co-chairs. And if you would start out, we've just heard from the FOP president. If you could start out and just talk to us for a few minutes about the book that you wrote and the research that you did, and the knowledge that that's given you about modern day 21st century policing.
Sure. So I'll just, I guess, start by saying, you know, I'm a sort of national reporter for the Washington Post, so I'm not familiar with or intimately familiar with the policies at Nashville, with MPD in Nashville. So what I'm about to say does not necessarily apply here. It's more kind of a look at policing on a national scale. But you know, I think my book, Rise of the Warrior Cop, is about the militarization of policing in America, and it looks at from both the standpoint of the equipment used, but I think more importantly of the mindset that militarization instills in police officers, and the two I think kind of feed off of each other. But I think what we've seen over the last 25, 30 years or so is a definitely shift in sort of how police are seen in some communities, how police officers see themselves. And I think there's been if not necessarily a shift, kind of more of an awareness of police culture and kind of some of the, I guess what you would say, or some of the more disturbing aspects of police culture. So, you know, in the United States, we have a history in this country and a tradition of drawing a firm line between the police and the military, right? There's a good reason for that. The two are, you know, a cop and a soldier are two very different jobs. Soldier's job is to annihilate a foreign enemy, or you know, to kill people and break things, to put it sort of bluntly. The police officer's job is to protect our rights and to keep the peace. And I think we've seen, you know, as we've seen sort of through the 1033 program, which is this transfer of military gear to police departments, through DHS grants, which have gone to purchase more sort of military or sort of military grade equipment, or equipment that we normally more associate with the battlefield. We've increasingly seen police officers wearing camouflage, including in places where there's really no reason to wear camouflage. I think there has been kind of a shift in how the police are viewed. I think there's, you know, it's important that communities see the police as sort of part of them, as people, as some of their own who are protecting them. And I think it's important that police officers see themselves as part of the community. And when you take a police officer and you sort of arm him like a soldier, and you dress him like a soldier, and you train him like a soldier, and you tell him, you know, he's fighting a war, whether it's drugs or terrorism or, you know, Antifa or whoever, you know, we shouldn't be surprised when that line between police officer and soldier starts to get blurred. You know, and as we've seen over the last few years, there have been investigations. BuzzFeed did one a couple of years ago. There have been subsequent by the Center for Investigative Reporting of, you know, for example, police officer postings on social media. You know, there have been way too many officers posting, you know, glorifications of violence, racist posts, anti-Muslim posts, bigoted posts. I believe the BuzzFeed report looked at several large metropolitan police departments across the country. I don't believe Nashville was one of them, but they found, I believe the number was 1 in 5 officers that for whom they were able to find a social media account had posted something that fit into one of these categories. I've personally written about recruiting videos, which we've seen in police agencies across the country, a lot of which you can find just by doing a YouTube search. But it isn't all of them, but a lot of the recruiting videos stress things like, you know, there's blaring guitars and police officers rappelling out of helicopters and kicking down doors and sticking dogs on people. And this is kind of the very first step in the process, right? This is recruiting. This is who you're trying to appeal to. and there's, you know, a lot of these videos, there's just not nearly enough emphasis on community service, on helping people, on, you know, the aspects of the kind of community-oriented aspects of policing. It's all about the kind of kicking butt and taking names aspects of it. So, you know, I think what we've seen kind of, I think, in response to the George Floyd incident and the protests that followed is you know, I've been writing about these issues for about 20 years, and I don't think I've ever seen such a dramatic shift in public opinion in terms of support for reform, including, you know, pretty radical reforms like abolishing qualified immunity. And, you know, I think it's a good time to kind of start thinking creatively about policing. You know, I'm not an abolish person or, you know, completely defunding the police, but I do think we can start asking questions about, you know, areas of policing, I mean, where we have to ask, is, you know, an armed employee of the local government really the best way to deal with the situation? I'm thinking about things like police officers in schools, which, you know, from the research I've seen, there's no real convincing data that officers in schools make the schools safer. You can think about things like, you know, how we respond to mental health crises, where, you know, if you have somebody who's suicidal or is having a breakdown of some kind, you know, sending a SWAT team to respond is I don't know, I think pretty self-evidently not the right response to somebody who's already kind of teetering on the edge. And even things like traffic enforcement, you know, I mean, there are, I think there are so many of these sort of viral incidents that we've seen have begun with a traffic stop. And police, you know, and police academies, police officers themselves, that repeatedly talk about how quickly a traffic stop can turn dangerous. And, you know, we can start thinking about things like, you know, how can we minimize those kinds of contacts? How can we minimize a lot of the animosity between police officers and marginalized communities because of the way traffic stops are enforced, because of pretext stops, because of profiling? We can do things like relying more on cameras with adequate safeguards, you know, to protect privacy and so forth. We can do things like having, you know, calling in plates and having tickets sent through the mail versus stops, which are dangerous, you know, for both the police officer and the motorist at times. So I think this is a good opportunity to sort of look at, you know, what are the ways in which we can use kind of less forceful, less coercive methods of you know, promoting public safety, and what ways can, you know, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of police officers over the years, and I can tell you that, you know, police officers aren't happy about being the first response when someone's in a mental health crisis. They, you know, that isn't something that they were trained for. That isn't something that they, you know, enjoy doing. And you know, I would venture to guess that a lot of police officers aren't crazy about doing a lot of traffic work either. But I mean, I think it's time to get creative. I mean, I think that we're in a moment where these are questions that are worth asking, and it's worth sort of maybe throwing out, you know, some of our conventional notions of what police work ought to be, and looking at other cities across the country for examples where we can, you know, maybe maximize public safety in a way that minimizes confrontation and the potential for violence between police and the public.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Balco. So now I'd like to open it up for the committee to ask questions of President Smallwood or Mr. Balco about the things that you've heard. I do want to just remind the committee to try to stick to recruiting, culture, promotion, you know, those things that we have on our bucket list. And I think both gentlemen have talked about issues that I think would lend themselves to questions about those particular areas in policing. So I'll open it up. Who would like to ask any questions?
Scary Moore, I've got a couple of questions.
Sure, go.
Mr. Balco, I get your message, and it's a very good message, but society itself has changed from what it used to be. When you have, I think there's certain instances where you have to have military type personnel responding to some of these instances. I get the message that that shouldn't be out there for the public to see, shouldn't be front line. And also, as far as mailing in tickets, I don't know the percentage, but I would assume that there's quite a high number of percentages with felons that are picked up by simple traffic stops. If that's the case, they're simply mailing in traffic tickets. You would eliminate a lot of police work in that matter, I would guess. So respond to those if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the need for a militarized response or militarized police in some instances, certainly in a city the size of Nashville, I think that's true. I think you need to have a SWAT team. You need to have an armored or armored vehicles for situations where somebody presents a threat to police officers. I absolutely agree with that. I think where we've seen a real shift in the use of this kind of force is that it used to be that SWAT teams were reserved for emergency type situations. So if you think of where somebody presents an imminent threat to someone else's life, so an active shooter or an hostage taking or a bank robbery type situation. Now, the studies that have been done, there hasn't been a sort of thorough national study, although the ACLU came close a few years ago, but there have been studies done of individual cities and states. What we found is about 65 to 80% of SWAT deployments now are to serve warrants on people suspected of drug crimes, and generally pretty low level drug crimes. Now, I can't speak to what the case is in Nashville because I don't believe there has been a study here. But that is a real shift in that kind of force, because if you think about it, you're going from using that kind of force against somebody who is in the process of committing a violent crime to using it to investigate someone who is still merely suspected of a drug crime. And as I said, they're usually fairly low-level drug crimes. So I think the danger isn't just sort of the presence of what you might call militarized equipment or gear. I think it's about the overuse and the problem of sort of guarding against the when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail philosophy. As for catching felons through traffic stops, I think if there's a felony stop, if you suspect somebody's in a stolen car, if there's a fugitive on the loose and you suspect that somebody driving by in a car is that person, I don't think anybody would say that we should stop police officers from making those stops. If the point you're making is that a failing to signal or running a stop sign or speeding is resulting in a lot of felons being caught. I guess I would just argue that I don't think that that's what those kinds of stops should be for. I think this is when you start saying that we're going to use routine traffic violations as a pretext to catch more violent criminals. I think that's when you get into problems with profiling. I think that's when you get into problems with coercive searches or illegal searches. I think if we're going to enforce traffic laws, we should enforce traffic laws. We shouldn't use traffic laws as a kind of net in order to try to catch other people. But that's, I'm sure there are people who disagree with that. But I just don't think that that's I think traffic laws should be about keeping our roads safe, not about, trying to catch people who may have committed crimes unrelated to the highway.
Madam Chair, if I might, this is Gary again. I agree with the traffic stop thing, and as a matter of fact, I agree with your analogy on the use of force. But on the traffic thing, I would go back, and I get it. I don't think you should be profiling anybody. But what I was getting at, and there's probably statistical data out there that may verify, but in a routine traffic stop, how many times has a person, let's say a police officer pulls somebody over for a simple running a stop sign. It's just simple traffic ticket. But when they ask for the license and they pull the license, they find out there's a felony warrant for them. I'm not saying pull them over out of suspicion, but out of routine traffic stops, how many routine traffic stops finds other more serious crimes have been committed, or there may be a warrant out? Surely there's data out there that would show that. Somebody has tracked it, I'm sure, and I'd like to know the answer to that if it's out there.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that. I guess I would just go back to my point before, which is just that I'm just not sure that that's. I think what we would gain by minimizing that kind of regular contact and the potential of these stops escalating and the damage I think they do between police and marginalized communities, I think would be, I think we would gain a lot more from that than we would by losing, the occasional felon who was pulled over for, running a stop sign. But, if there's data out there showing that I'm wrong, that this is, that lots of lives would be otherwise saved, then I guess I'm willing to be persuaded otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I see your hand, Daryl. I want to check in quickly with David or Mac. I know you guys both have to jump off at 6. And so do you have questions for either one of our subject matter experts?
I do have a quick question. If you don't mind, I'll shout it out. Or Mac, would you like to go ahead? Or do you have something?
Oh, no, I don't. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Smallwood, a question about recruiting. If our next chief of police and that person's boss, the mayor, are very publicly committed to having incoming class and lower level police officers that demographically reflect our community in a way that is not the case right now, specifically with African-American representation. If those two individuals are publicly committed to it, is there any reason to believe that it would not happen? We've been struggling now for some time, at least I have been, trying to understand if that's been a desire of the community, why are the numbers flat and have been flat as far back as you can look? And so first, my question is, if those two individuals are publicly committed to that happening, is there any reason to think that it wouldn't happen? And I guess as far as the union goes, I assume that would raise no issues for you one way or the other, would it?
Mr. Fox, absolutely not. It would raise zero issues for us. Actually, we absolutely welcome any kind of applicant that is qualified, well qualified for the position. I would say we probably need to be careful, though. The question operates on the presumption that we've not already been operating that way for the better part of a decade, which is as long as I've been here. I can't speak to the culture of the police department before I joined it, but I think largely the problem that we are facing is the fact that everybody is welcome in the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. Everybody is welcome to join as an employee, but we can't force you, right? And the only thing we can do, we have a few options at our disposal to draw people in. It's pay, benefits, and working conditions. And if people aren't willing to come for the current pay, benefits, and working conditions, we need to find a way to change that so that we are attracting the candidates that we want. But I would certainly want to make sure that the entire committee and anybody in our community understood that everybody that wants to work here and is qualified to work here is welcome to work here. There's no exclusion for anybody that looks like our community or doesn't look like our community. That's certainly not a qualifier or disqualifier.
Do you have any follow-up, David?
Not really. It's just, I think it's a matter of public policy. We need to have a police force that, Mr. Small, I certainly understand your position, your explanation that, if we provide, good jobs, then whoever is interested needs to step up and apply. At the same time, we sort of have a public policy challenge where I think the city really needs to have a more racially diverse police force. And I'm not sure that the status quo, or I'll rephrase that. I am sure that the status quo is not getting us there, because it is not. Again, and that's just my personal judgment. It may or may not be the judgment of the rest of the committee or anyone else. It just seems to me that given the tensions that have been rising substantially over the last 6 or 7 years in particular between many members of the African-American community and the police force, it would not be a bad thing to have, because we've seen all the demographic figures, and I don't know, it just seems that something we need to more affirmatively figure out how to improve on. It is my personal thought. I understand your point, though, Mr. Smallwood, that create good jobs and people need to, speak up and go for them if they'd like.
Well, and I suppose I probably could have answered your original question that as you kind of replied there, I noticed that I hadn't. Yeah, I'm certainly all for the chief and the mayor taking a position that we need diversity in our department. I think what I wanted to make sure I pointed out is that we've always supported that. You know, I'm not sure, quite frankly, I'm not sure that's our solution as much as I'd like it to be. I think we need to be a little more innovative. We need to find solutions. We can't exclude anybody, no matter what, but we certainly want to have everybody that's interested in the job to sign up and apply. Like I mentioned earlier, we're 130 plus officers short, so we are definitely needing some more folks to come in. Everybody's welcome. Join the MNPD and join us to help us make the community a better place. It's just, you got to have people who are interested.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mac, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
I'm just soaking it all up tonight. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mac. Daryl, you had your hand up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. President Smallwood, in looking at the data and the composition of the department, it's my professional opinion that you have both an attraction and a retention problem. And my informal research in the field tells me there tends to be somewhat of a morale issue, and I'm wondering if that's related to the amount of overtime that's being worked because of the shortage in the department. But could you kind of walk me through, from the union perspective, how far off are you on total compensation? And if you could break that down for me between benefits and wages, if you could talk to me about those who are lateraling out, why, those who are lateraling in, where are we getting them from? And then finally, talk to me about just the touchy-feely stuff, the morale of the department. What are the guys saying? What are they feeling? Sort of beyond what's being driven through the news right now. I think we understand that, but internal to Nashville, what's going on? If you could help me with those 3 points, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. And if I miss anything, please feel free to interject and remind me what I've missed. So I'll start with kind of salary. I think you touched on that first. And certainly we had put a committee together at the beginning of the year. Councilman Bob Nash established a employee benefit salary study committee, and it exposed the police department as 34% behind some of our comparable peer cities. So we are significantly behind in salary, and there's certainly opportunity for improvement in our benefits. A starting police officer today would come in at 55, I believe at 55,000, and the cost of living for Nashville is 80,000 plus. And if you are a sole income provider for your family and you're making $55,000, so now you are earning less than what it costs just to live comfortably in the city of Nashville. So you have to supplement that income. And it goes to the second point you talked about, which is the amount of overtime officers are working. So now officers, there's no officer out there very few, I should say, that I know of that can work just their job and not have any supplemental income. They all have some form of a secondary or extra job where they're working overtime just to pay the bills. And we should never, ever, ever, ever put our employees in that position, because if you're working more than your 42 or 43 hours a week just to pay your bills, that leads to a decline in your morale, and you feel like you can never get ahead in life. And we certainly want our employees to have time with their families and feel valued and feel like that the risks they're taking to protect their community are worth the return. And all these things come into play, and certainly salary is a big proponent or a big problem within our department and as folks view it. But bigger parts as a whole, when you're looking at policing in America right now, and people are pointing to a lot of things that they think are problematic in our profession. They're very critical, and I think a lot of times those criticisms are unfair to law enforcement officers. Police officers come in every day, and they're hardworking men and women. They do a noble job, and they do an honorable job, and they're working hard just to serve their community. And then they face these criticisms, and their lives can be turned upside down in the blink of a moment, even if they followed their training and they followed their policy. So that certainly leads to a tipping point in morale. And I can tell you here in the MNPD, officers are at a tipping point. We have had promises broken year after year. Unfortunately, this mayor's kind of been dealt a hand that he's not able to rebound from. and fix some of those broken promises. And I'm hopeful that years coming that will be repaired. And then we've also got a culture within the department, and I've talked about this for a couple of years now, where our department was disciplining officers to a rate of 42% more than any other department in the nation. So we were holding our officers accountable for every minor thing. And so when you have internal forces and external forces working against you, that pressure builds and builds and builds. And then eventually our folks make that determination that either this department is not for them or this profession is not for them. And they'll leave here and go to a different department. And we lose thousands and thousands of dollars that we've invested in them for experience that they've gained over the time they've been here, plus the training that we've given them year after year, because we have to train our officers progressively every year. And as I alluded to earlier, we've got families who are at home waiting for their loved one to come home. And, they're on pins and needles the entire time that we're out of shift, answering calls or working an extra job, just hoping that nothing happens. And that stress isn't fair on them. And some of them just can't handle it. Some of them I have had my friends come to me and tell me, my wife has told me she doesn't want me doing this anymore. She can't deal with the risks. Well, they've been here 10 years, but it's come to this unsurmountable obstacle that they can't get over. So I think you've got a whole conglomerate of things that are coming together that are creating these issues. And you talked about laterals coming in and laterals going out. I see our officers lateraling out all over the place. There's no, connect the dot that I could see, other than I've seen them going to smaller departments where they feel like there'll be a lot less political pressure. But I've also seen them go to other departments where there's been better pay and benefits. So, I hate to kind of keep using the term that this is a global issue, because we have a lot of challenges that we're facing, but it is. You can't just point to one thing. There are a lot of things that come together that we need to face. And the folks that are coming in, I think it's been 13 years since our federal class. This is the first one we've had, and they were kind of salt and peppered. Some were local, some were not local. So it's a little too early to try and explain the data there that says where they're coming from and why they're coming from there.
A follow-up question on your benefits. You outlined your wages. How do the benefits compare to peer cities or peer communities and agencies?
We do have a good benefits package here in Nashville. We are, of course, always looking for improvements. The problem that we are facing now is the cost. So as an employee of this police department, I pay into my health care, I pay $500 a month. And when you compare that to other cities, it's some are similar, some are nowhere near that. So, there's a huge cost involved in having healthcare. It's a huge cost, a huge liability for the city to take on, but it's also becoming a massive burden for our employees, just to make sure that ourselves and our families are taken care of. That healthcare becomes an issue. And of course, when you look at employees who are looking for retirement, developing that pension plan and understanding how that works for you is very important. And of course, we're seeing external forces challenging the plan that we've had in place that is very well funded, that is taking good care of our employees, that lays out a roadmap for them to be well taken care of for the future. And that certainly leads to concerns for folks who are making that decision. They see external forces coming down on the benefits side of things, and folks are going, well, if my pension's not going to be here, then I'm not going to be here. So that's a huge impact. And like I said, we're always looking for ways to improve so we can continue to recruit and retain the best and brightest. But certainly we cannot lose ground in those areas.
Thank you. Beth, you had a question.
Yeah, and first I just want to say that I think that everybody would probably agree with so much of what you said about, the challenges. I think even if you've not been directly involved with the force, you intuitively know just the deep challenges in terms of the lifestyle that you are discussing. I guess though that, all of us as organizations to run companies have had to dig a little bit more deeply culturally over the last 6 months particularly, and try to understand the divides that we may not even recognize that keep people from feeling like totally welcome or totally part of a community, in this case, a community being the police force. And I think that when I'm kind of piggybacking on the retention issue and the questions, which I think all of us who've evaluated any of the data understand that there is that. So let's say that recruiting were off the table and we were able to do that successfully and bring in, you know, minority and African American officers equally. What are the things that you would hope could be improved in order for there to feel more like a level playing field, or more like everybody feels a sense of that community? And I phrase that meaning I think that all of us, no matter what organization we're with, would improve something. So I think that if we could get to the root of some of that, it might help us, you know, establish a framework where we can cultivate a stronger unity within the you know, organization.
So your question is?
Yeah, that's a good, yeah. I'm really trying to say, what would you improve to create? I mean, all of us, I think, realize that even inadvertently, there are things that we do that don't create a welcoming, a sense of community within a department. And I'm talking specifically in terms of retaining those officers who we do recruit, who are Black or brown or African American. I mean, what can we do to make them feel, to retain them at the same levels that we do our white officers?
So internally, I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and of course, we're always going to say that, right? We're always looking out for the betterment of our members. As I've alluded to, salaries, benefits, working conditions, equipment, staffing. We've talked to the mayor's administration several times about the fact that even if we had the full 1510 that we're budgeted for, we would be drastically behind the curve as it compares to other major cities across the country for staffing levels. And what that does, we all know Nashville is a center for major events and special events, and, you know, country music festival and all these other things. NASCAR comes to town. I think we saw that Indy's going to be coming and doing a race. When we don't have enough officers that we're even budgeted for, we're putting that demand on the officers that are still here. So those officers are being required to come in and work these events. So they're working overtime. They don't feel like they're a part of the team. They feel like they're the only thing that's making the wheel turn. And now we're not even up to full staffing, what we call full staffing. So we're increasing that demand exponentially on those employees that are already here. And what does that do for them? That takes them away from their families. It doesn't give them the ability to decompress, which is huge right now in law enforcement. Officers need the ability to step away, disconnect, spend time with family, decompress, get their wellness back to center where it needs to be. So if we focus on staffing, bringing staffing levels up to an adequate level where we are not struggling just to meet the normal day-to-day demands of Nashville, that would be huge. That would show that we value our employees, show our department that we value the employees, their time, their families, that they're not just a number. I hear so much, we're just a number. We're another number to this department. We're another number to this city. They don't care. So showing them, hey, you are a member of our family and we want to take care of you. The other thing, and you've probably, if you've paid any attention to the media, you've probably seen me say it several times, broken promises. There's nothing worse than a broken promise to an employee. If you tell an employee you're going to do something, you got to follow through. If you don't fund step increments, if you don't fund promise raises, if you don't fund the things that you've promised them when they signed up to do the job, you're going to have a retention issue because now you've broken that trust. It's important that there's a strong, solid relationship of trust between employer and employee. And if that trust is fractured in any way, it's very hard to repair. And then when it's fractured more than one time, obviously you can see the long-term damage. External forces, I think, are anything, I don't know if that's anything you're interested in, but support from our community. is huge. And it's not much that I think the mayor's office can generally deal other than, getting in front of a camera and saying we support our police officers. But when we're constant, I know because I deal with community members day in and day out, just by nature of the virtue of my job. When we're dealing with the community day in and day out, I know they support us. I know by and large, the members of the community support what we do, even if they think that, they challenge the things we have done. They support us for what we do because they know that this is a noble profession and that we would lay our lives down for a complete stranger if we thought it would save them. So showing a police officer just a small glimpse of support, I guess, and saying thank you for what you do, or just appreciating them publicly. I think if there was anything to say about external forces, I think that would be huge.
Have we ever done surveys internally to ask our officers, specific questions about what it is that creates the most sort of stress for them, or the most, like the desire to leave?
Yeah, so the FOP has conducted several surveys over the last 10 years with our employees. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that cause the most stress for them are either administrative fallout for, a viral incident. They're more worried. Here's the concerning thing. A police officer in today's day and age, in today's environment, is more worried about being mistreated by the administration that they work for, whether it be or police, than they are about being shot by a suspect. That's concerning. They're more worried about the court of public opinion than facts and law, and that's concerning because we teach them, this is a black and white world. This is you operate in the gray area, but you operate under these certain sets of rules and circumstances. And here's your policy. Here's what you have to follow. Here's the law. Here's what you have to follow. And then when something goes viral or goes awry or it doesn't look good, certainly things can be turned upside down for a police officer, and they're more worried about the perception than they are the reality. And I think that's a scary time for any police officer or family that is related to one.
Thank you. Demetria?
I've got a question for Bradley. You've studied and looked at so many departments all over the country. Can you think of a place where deliberate and consistent changes in internal department culture have disrupted that sort of groupthink that you talked about with the 1 in 5 officers posting, disturbing social media?
In terms of consistent, a city that has consistently done well on that front, it's hard to point to a city that, has done well on that front over the course of the time that I've been, this has been my beat. I will say that there are examples kind of, where good police leadership has changed the culture within a department, at least while that particular, police chief or sheriff was there. There's the San Jose Police Department in the 1990s under Chief Joseph McNamara is one good example. There have been Chief Burbank in Salt Lake City. Tucson has had a good change in its police culture over the last 10 years or so, thanks to the leadership of a couple of police officers. So there are examples. One thing I would sort of say in response to some of the comments from President Smallwood is that, I think in terms of retaining Black police officers, I've actually spent the last couple of months interviewing Black police officers in particular for a story I'm working on. And, I think just like white officers, Black police officers do, want to be, obviously respected and valued by the community, but also, and you see this with groups like the National Black Police Officers Association and interviews of leadership they've given since these protests have flared up. Black police officers also are part of the Black community in addition to the law enforcement community. And when you talk to Black police officers, you get a very different view of the current culture of policing than when you strictly talk to white police officers. there is sympathy for the protest among a lot of Black police officers. And so, I think part of attracting and retaining good Black law enforcement officers also does mean actually listening to the complaints from marginalized communities. It is sort of, listening to the people who are leading the protests in the streets and engaging with them and having a dialogue with them. I think that is part of sort of retaining and attracting and retaining a police force that kind of reflects the population of the city.
Demetria, did you have any follow-up on that?
No, I'll just, her hand.
Okay, Whitney?
Thanks, Margie. This is for Mr. Smallwood. Can you, I'm not super familiar with the FOP. Can you sort of describe your membership, like about how many members do you have, and if you have any like sort of breakdowns, like racial data, like that? Can you sort of describe, who are members in the Nashville FOP?
So, of that, I'll explain that in a second here. We have approximately 2,000 members. They can choose to stay a member of the FOP, and you just kind of the staying on after. It's just, it's kind of a fraternity, or for lack of a better term. You come to the meetings and socialize with your friends, and you're still part of our family, right? Just because you've retired doesn't mean you're not with us anymore. You're just not working here anymore. So I am, for lack of a better term, kind of a one-man band. So I don't have the time to break down our membership roles into, what different levels of diversity we have, but I can say that we have about 85%, somewhere in that role, of MNPD officers who have chosen to be a member of the FOP. So it's a large majority. And I don't know the racial breakdown. That's not information that we capture, but it is certainly, like I've said earlier about the MNPD, the same applies to the FOP. Anybody's welcome. There's no question whatsoever about race, because frankly, we want everybody to be part of our family.
Whitney, do you have any follow-up for that?
No, thank you.
Phil, go ahead.
Very much for President Smallwood. I have a question relative to the opportunities for advancement within the Metropolitan Police Department. Do you think that the opportunities are handled fairly and efficiently? And generally, is there a problem there?
I suspect you're speaking to the promotional process.
Yes.
So we've had several members raise concerns about the way the promotional process works. And to be frank, there are members on both sides of the issue. Some believe in it, some don't believe in it. In years past, you would test and be placed in ranked order. That ranked order would then be delivered to the chief of police, and then he would promote off of that ranked order. I believe under the surpass regime, correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody knows, but I believe under the surpass era, that was changed. And now you test, you're ranked, you're banded, dependent on the rank, whether it's sergeant, lieutenant, or captain, you're banded into a band, and that band is sent over to the chief's office in an unranked folder. So the names are just sent over to the chief's office. And the chief says, well, I just select the best candidates out of the band. And then once candidates are selected out of that band, the next group of folks are moved up into that band. And then that opens that band back up for selection. There are members that think that we should be, if we're going to have a testing process, we should be confident in our testing process, and we should promote whether we've got 1 or 15 vacancies in that rank. We should promote right down the list, 1 to 15. There are also those that believe that the chief should have the opportunity to choose throughout that band. I have seen sometimes where that has not served a candidate fairly, where a candidate has tested well but has not been selected, and then they don't get the opportunity to serve at that upper rank.
In a nutshell, are you saying there's politics that come into play?
I'm hesitant to say there's politics at play. And the reason I'm hesitant to say that is, and this is well before my time on the police department, there were significant politics at play where I've heard stories where people have had relationships with politicians in town. I don't think that has anything to do with our promotional process. But I think, I'm sorry, it looked like you had something to say there.
One more question. This is just related to our procedures for advancement. And I know that you have researched other cities. Are we pretty much in line with our policies, how we do advancements with other major cities about our size?
So there are some that do what I've described as going right down the list in ranked order. And if you believe in your testing process, that's the fair way to do it. If you scored number one, you should be the first one to have a bite at the apple, per se, to be promoted. But in this banding era, or this banding process, you could potentially pick number 6 instead of number 1 first. And as ranking goes, and as seniority and steps and all that kind of stuff, our pay plan goes, that could have significant differences down the road. So I think my members would want me to tell you they want ranked order, but there's, like I've said, there's some on both sides of the fence. And there's also in other departments across the country, there's the banding. And there's also in some departments across the country where the chief can just pick. So there's no tried and true best practice. It's kind of what's catered to each department in each city.
Okay, here's the loaded question.
Yes.
With your magic wand, what would you prefer?
So we have proposed on several occasions to the city in our negotiations that we return to the ranked order promotional process with this specific caveat. If the chief does not feel like somebody is ready for promotion, the chief has the ability to select from the band and quote unquote skip a candidate, but has to give that candidate who's in the band specific coaching to tell them how they may improve themselves so that they can be considered for promotion in the very near future. We don't think that if you qualify, if you're an employee and you qualify based on the standards laid out by the police department and you're ranked in an order, that individual should be allowed to be promoted and serve in that role. And if you're not going to select them, then they need to know why, and they need to know how they can do better so they can be selected.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for your help on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, who else has any questions for our two subject matter experts? Mr. Harris, go ahead. You're muted.
Mr. Smallwood, thank you for your service and for your advocacy for the police department. I have two questions. One is of a recruitment nature, and one is of a internal and morale issue. The first question is where is the positive, visible recruitment marketing campaign to recruit officers, specifically people of color? I don't see that, and it would be refreshing, I think, for the community to see that in light of a positive spin on why, why you want me as a police officer or why I can be a police officer. So that's the first question. And the second question, are there internal, implicit and explicit cultural and racial biases at play here that's not being addressed? Because I hear a lot of the internal concerns that you speak of, and it seems like we're having conversations around what the real issues are. Because when I talk to Black police officers, I get a very different story.
So to your first question on positive marketing for recruitment, I think in recent months we have seen some steps moving in that direction. And to be quite frank with you, in years past there has been 3 to 5 applicants for every vacant position. And this is not a Metro Nashville Police Department quote. This is a nationwide quote, right? Everybody was applying for this job. They were interested in this job. So I think police departments probably felt like they didn't have to work hard to recruit their candidates. It was an open position. We had more than we needed to recruit for. And maybe they got behind the curve on that. I think, especially some of the things we're seeing Deputy Chief Loki step into, some of the recruitment measures she's talked about, and you heard from her. I think you were here earlier in the meeting when she talked about we're going to get some more diverse candidates in to help us recruit from our community, to have people that look like our community to participate. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm not going to say we're there yet, because obviously we're not, but I'm optimistic we're moving in that direction, and I hope to see some positive results in the very near future. And anything that we can do to help in that realm, we are certainly here to do that. And to your second question about internal implicit biases, I can only speak to what I have experienced in my career, and I have never seen anywhere in the police department where race has been a determining factor for promotion or discipline or transfer or anything like that at all. It's always been about job performance and whether or not you do a good job, a competent job at what you're doing day in and day out. The decisions that I've made or decisions that I've seen made, and I've never, for all of my ills with some of the decisions our administration has made, and they will tell you I've had some very strong opposition for them when they've made these decisions. I've never seen that be a factor. I've never seen diversity be a factor in their decision making, or any minority group whatsoever have any kind of negative impact. And I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I don't know that it answers my question, because I hear a very different story, when, like I said, when I talk to police officers, and it just seems to me, that, there's a real internal issue that is not being addressed. And I'm not sure, how we get there, in order, to increase our numbers, as it relates, to African-American representation on the police force, as well as other nationalities, on the police force, but I'll start right there.
And I think, what we need to do to address that is, obviously I'm not aware of it because I've not seen it or experienced it. And if those folks are feeling that way, they need to report it. They need to report that either to us or to the police department or to Metropolitan HR. Somebody needs to know that they feel like they've been mistreated so that it can be investigated, so that issue can be flushed out. But I think, and especially now under a new administration, I think culture is kind of a moving target for us. But you're not doing this city any favors, this community any favors, or this police department any favors if you don't report what you feel like is mistreatment.
Thank you. Beth, you had another question.
Yeah, no, but I want to follow up on your comment about reporting it. So can you go into, if someone were to report that they felt there was a bias, a racial or cultural bias, what the process would be, how they would report it, and then what would be done as a result by the department?
So it kind of depends on how that report is made. If it's made to Metro HR, the big HR division, my understanding is they launch an investigation. And those individuals that are part of that investigation interview all the parties involved and gather all the facts, just like you would any other investigation, and make a determination and finding. And somebody from that level will pass down their finding. The same exists in the police department if that complaint is made internally in the police department, not with Metro HR. And I may be speaking outside of understanding, so excuse me if I'm trying to, for lack of a better term, dumb this down. Police has their own HR, and then there's Metro HR, which is like the bigger division. They oversee all of Metro government's employees, and then police has their own HR. So if we launch an investigation in police HR, they're going to do the same. They're going to interview the parties involved, try to understand the different perspectives, bring the facts together, and then compile a report. And if there is wrongdoing found, you can depend on the fact that somebody will be held accountable. Like I told you earlier, this police department holds their employees 42% more accountable than any other police department in the nation. That's a fact that we've been using for years. And so you can be sure that if there's wrongdoing found on an investigation, that employee is going to be held accountable. But we also have to understand that sometimes there's confused perspectives, or people see things in a perspective that doesn't quite line up to what they think actually happened. And that's not just in policing, that's everywhere. We've all had misunderstandings. So sometimes a complaint can be developed and the findings aren't what somebody wants, even though the facts don't support it. That's what we have to go with. And so that's how our investigations are conducted. But there are several different avenues, whether it be EEOC, Metro HR, Police HR, OPA, the police chief himself. If you have an area where you feel like you've been mistreated, I know folks have come to the FOP on several occasions where they felt like, hey, I don't think I've been treated right. And we afford them an opportunity to stand up and have that heard.
And so when you look at the group or the team that is actually evaluating, those issues and those questions, is that a pretty diverse group of people, or is that, is that more of a traditionally, white group of people?
So the group, depending on where you lodge the complaint, is always different. If it's internal with HR, I believe it's the HR director reviews, and if you speak to a panel, it's a diverse panel of your peers. But it just kind of varies on where you're going. So it'd be hard for me to kind of put a bullseye on what the diversity of the group makeup would be.
Okay, do we have any other committee members that would like to ask questions? I had a couple of questions, one for each of our panelists. I'll start with you, James. Would it be possible for, okay, go ahead, Reggie.
Okay, President Smallwood, how you doing? Me and President Smallwood have worked together on a few things. Most of the time we figure things out. And he's going up against a lot of opposition, just as I have. Sometimes when it comes to the upper management, basically we're talking about the chiefs of police. We both represent a certain group of police officers. President Smallwood's FOP organization is a little bit different than mine. President Smallwood, I'm sure he would agree that basically they'll handle wages, benefits, those type of things, and they do a great job at representing that. My representation is of Black police officers. So I get all the complaints. I get all of the phone calls. I get a lot of the calls from the community. And I've been a president for about almost 15 years of Black police officers. So I have a lot of history with going to chiefs and hearing complaints about what the Black officers are going through. So my take is going to be very different than President Smallwood's, because mine is almost solely representing that small fraction of the department. Even if we go into a full staffing of the police department, we're not going to have a representation of minority police officers in that number. Minorities usually stay around 10%. And of course, you know that in Nashville, we're about at 27%. So even at staffing, full staffing, we're not going to be representing the community reflecting the community the way we should. So I'm going to go back and say that if we don't make an effort, if we don't make we don't put some truth to this, and that's what this whole group is about, learning exactly what we need to do to change these things. I have gone, like I said, we've seen 60 applicants go to the training academy with basically none or maybe one or two minorities. That's a problem. When you look in almost every rank of the police department, and sometimes in some ranks there is maybe one or two that represent you, that is a problem. When we have community events and police officers show up and there are no people of color, no representation of that community out there, the community says this is a problem. And this is just, I mean, this goes along with the females, along with minorities. There's just a serious shortage of minorities. We've getting a good chief that's going to make to cure this problem is going to have to be what we call, I said, intentional, because I have been, like I said, fighting this fight for many, many years. And there is not a lot that the chiefs have been doing in the past to make sure that this actually happens. Because if you think about it, most of the complaints that I hear as the president of the Black police officers are either going to be from the Black police officers or it's going to be from the Black community. And in both cases, there is no representation. We're talking about recruitment, we're talking about retention, we're talking about promotions, and usually transfers, not being able to transfer to a certain department like K9 or the horses or something like that. Because there are so many other people ahead of them, it end up not being no promotions or no transfers to get there. So the minorities, for the most part, I know in certain years, we were heavy in the patrol unit, where we answer all the calls, but we were not there to help make any decisions on the things that were going on. Now, that's not President Smallwood's fault. We're talking about the leadership of the department. So if it's not reflective in our ranks, like a sergeant or a lieutenant and a captain, when you have a whole station and on one shift, you may have one minority supervisor to cover a whole sector of Nashville. How often do you think that the community is going to see representation in their community? And then this is when I will get the calls. We don't have any minorities, females. We don't have any minority males. Every time somebody comes in our community, there are white officers. And then what happens is that the Black community says, well, the only thing they're doing is coming in here and arresting the people in our community, but they don't see any representation. Because you and I both know that representation is important no matter where we go, because that's what this is all about. And so when it comes down to the promotions, we will constantly go against going straight down a list. The reason why is because when you have, at one point, like I said, we had over 300, at one time we had over 380 officers taking a promotional exam. We only had about 30 minorities because the numbers were so low. Well, when you go straight down the list and you're only making 25 promotions, we might get one or two possibly out of that straight down the list. So we can't afford to keep doing that same old thing over and over again. What we did propose was a 50-50, which means if the chief is going to make 30 promotions, he gets a chance to promote the first 15 straight down the list, no questions asked, because some people are good test takers, they're going to score well, but you and I both know just because you're a good test taker don't make you a good police officer. But we'll deal with that. Give the chief the first 15. Allow the chief to help make representation with the other 15. He might want to go down to number 29 and pick a Hispanic, or he might say, I need some representation over here in this community. It allows him to be able to pick and choose to help equal out what he needs for the community. Otherwise, if we're going to go straight down the list, the way the numbers are, if you take 300 white marbles and throw in 30 black marbles, how often are you going to pull out a black marble? Not that often. Or if you got some really, really good test takers, the first 15 or 20, you might not have any minorities. So I'm saying all that to say, we have to really get down to the real deal if we're going to make this change. And someone asked earlier about a survey. It would really be nice, because if you really heard from the black police officers, you're going to hear a lot about what the struggles really are. And to fix this, maybe we do need to hear from more. I mean, I don't want this survey to be partial or anything, but it would definitely give you a better look at inside what the black police officers are going through, the struggles that they're having as far as getting promoted, getting transferred, making some type of promotions, being reflective in their community. You would hear a lot more, and you would get a lot better idea that the struggle is really real with these black police officers. And one more thing, and I'll be through because I don't want to take up much time, but this even with the marches going on, I participated in a march myself as president of the Black Police Office. I participated because, one, I am part of a black community. So it's hard for a black police officer not to say I don't feel the struggle, because I am part of a black community. And I don't like to see these things happen in my community, but at the same time, I'm part of a police department that's supposed to be representing and doing things right. So the black police have a hard struggle with when they go in their communities and people are calling them a sellout because they standing there on the police line. They calling them a sellout when they go back into their communities. But at the same time, they're like, look, I'm a black man or black woman in this community, and I got a black child too. I got a black son too. I can understand that this might happen to him. So let's get down to the real deal with this if we're going to do it. And I yield the floor.
Thank you, Reggie. I'll go ahead and start with Radley. You've been quiet for quite some time and patient with us. This is Margie Quinn. I would like to ask you, in your research and in your profession, I guess, how do you think the warrior mindset impacts police culture?
Well, I think it creates a very kind of antagonistic sort of us versus them sort of mentality. I think President Obama's Commission on 21st Century Policing, recommended that from the academy onward that we switch when it comes to training from a warrior mindset to more of a guardian mindset, and I think that's more consistent with how we've traditionally viewed policing. That is, that police are here to protect us and to enforce our constitutional rights. They aren't here to sort of be an occupying force or to see people as threats rather than citizens that whom they serve. I think there is a place for a warrior mentality that's in the Army, in the military, on a battlefield. But I think there are a lot of different ways that the warrior mentality can sort of creep into policing. I think part of it, it is just, and I think, Officer Smallwood probably doesn't want me citing him in this way, but I think he kind of touched on it, which is, policing is as a profession has actually been getting safer since the mid-1990s. And in fact, over the last 5 or 6 years have been among the safest for police officers that we have on record. Now, that's not to say the police officers still don't actually face, threats or danger, but there's still about, I think probably on the average, about 50 police officers who are feloniously killed in the line of duty. That's 50 too many. But in terms of perspective and context, that's out of about 700,000 active duty police officers. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do everything we can to protect those officers, But I do think you run a risk when you overemphasize the dangers of the job, when you are constantly telling police officers that every threat they face, that every person they interact with, could be their last interaction, or that there's a constant threat to that this, preventing them from going home to their families at night. This, that there's a war on cops, a phrase that we hear over and over and over again. And I think what happens is that you introduce a mindset that it puts police officers on edge. It would put anyone on edge. And it conditions officers to see sort of innocent gestures as furtive or dangerous. And I think we've seen this in a lot of the kind of high-profile incidents we've seen over the last several years, where a completely sort of innocuous gesture by a motorist or somebody the police have stopped has been interpreted in a hostile way, and the police have reacted and ended up hurting or killing an innocent person. So I think we should do everything we can to protect police officers, but I do think that by overemphasizing the dangers of policing, by constantly sort of hammering away at this idea that there's a war on police officers, that this is that this job is a job where they sort of need to be in fear for their lives every day, really does kind of contribute to that warrior mindset. It contributes to this idea that they may not go home at the end of the night. And that's true for a very, 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 very small percentage of police officers. But we also have to balance public safety with that. So I think there's the problems of militarization, there's problems with the gear, there's the problems of sort of the warrior kind of mentality of lethal force training that emphasizes that doesn't emphasize de-escalation. But I think there is also a problem of overstating the threats to police officers in a way that makes them on edge in a manner that doesn't kind of correspond to the actual threat.
I guess more specifically, I'm asking how you think that impacts women in law enforcement internally. It's not that women can't be warriors. They certainly can, but how would that impact, say women in law enforcement?
I'm sorry, I did not hear the part about women in your original question, which is probably why I didn't address it. Well, look, I think that women law enforcement officers, I think in general, police departments would be healthier and more kind of responsive to the community in good ways if there were a higher percentage of women police officers. But I do think that when you do kind of inculcate that warrior mentality, when women police officers are constantly told that they face a threat and that every interaction could be their last, or every traffic stop could be their last. I do think that there may be it could possibly lead to a quicker sort of reaction to use force and to use heavier force, because again, if you're constantly seeing even sort of innocent gestures as potentially threatening or as furtive gestures, and you're interacting with a man who you think may be able to overpower you, you're going to be quicker to reach for a weapon. And I've written about a lot of cases. I've just been writing about a case in Little Rock where a woman police officer who said she didn't feel comfortable using her baton or her taser, shot and killed a 68-year-old man who wasn't complying with orders, and she said felt threatening. There's evidence that he wasn't threatening, but we'll never know actually what happened. But I do think that warrior mentality, again, that suggestion that there's a threat around every corner, I think it can have an added detrimental effect on women police officers.
Thank you. James, I wanted to ask you a question. You had mentioned the working conditions and how that impacted sort of morale and culture, because I think as morale declines, culture tends to decline as well. If you could give us a couple of examples of how you think the working conditions for the MNPD rank and file are impacting culture.
Sure. And for mine, I'd like to address just a couple of the comments that were made just prior to me. And I've heard over and over from the other expert witness the term warrior mentality. And a lot of the things that he has cited, I'm not sure where he's drawing his information from, but it's clear that it's not things that are based in our department. So I can tell you that several years ago, the then Chief Anderson had shifted away from anything that had the warrior mindset attached to it, and started calling the department's officers guardians to give that different mentality. And we certainly emphasize de-escalation and understanding use of force, and when it is right to apply and when it's not right to apply. We preach
James, I think your internet is that his internet or my internet?
I think he is.
James, I think your internet connection is failing on you. Hey, Eric.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Can you mute James for a minute?
Brandon, can you mute James for us, please?
We'll see if he can come back on. If not, maybe we can ask him for some of those recommendations on adverse working conditions. Maybe he can give us those in writing. Does anybody have any additional questions for Radley?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Gary.
As it relates to women on the police force, do you have any data that shows how more likely they are to use force than a male officer?
Madam Chair, this is Dia Cirillo, and I can answer Mr. Moore's question about that. We do have in the repository, in the shared folder, information about use of force by sworn officers, by gender and race, as well as who are the alleged suspects, who are the recipients of use of force. So off the top of my head, I think women have applied force about 10% of the time. That's the number that comes to mind. I think that's the highest number. But we can pull that up and get back to the committee on that.
Thank you.
Gary, did you have any additional questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. James, I think we lost you there and didn't get most of that, but I wonder if you would just give us in writing maybe 2 or 3 examples of working conditions or situations that you think are negatively impacting the MNPD rank and file.
Sure. So can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. Fortunately, in the world of COVID, the overworked the way it was to. You know, we have talked about things like shift work, where officers are working a lot of time and not able to decompress and get back to their families, get away from work. One of the things we proposed to Interim Chief Drake is going to a 4-10 shift rotation, which he is open to implementing and looking for ways to make that happen. One of the barriers that we are facing is a low number of staffing and enough equipment. We don't have enough cars for our officers currently to do what they have to do. We have officers when we need to deploy them in critical incidents that are reporting for duty. We're giving them an assignment and they cannot report to their duty station because we don't have a police car to put them in. The same applies when they come in to report for duty to answer calls. We've had officers waiting around in precincts for hours at a time for an extra car to come back to the precinct just so that they can get in the car and go out and answer a call because they've been waiting on somebody to return from the call that they were working. So equipment goes into, or deficient equipment goes into not being able to improve working conditions and staffing. We don't have enough officers to make things like this that would make our working conditions better, that would help us to more efficiently serve our community. That makes our calls for service, our response time slower, makes us less effective in combating crime. And certainly when you have all those things coming together, when you have lacking equipment, lacking staffing, overworked and underpaid officers, you see that morale start to decline. And you can kind of see it set into them little by little by little. And that certainly has an impact on them long-term on the job.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any other questions for our SMEs tonight? Great, thank you so much, President Smallwood. Thank you, Radley, so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate it, and if we need anything further, maybe we'll reach out to you in writing as we continue the work of the committee.
Madam Chair,
thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I think Whitney had a question.
Did you have a question, Whitney? Or were you just popping back on?
Oh, just popping back on.
Clifton, your hand is up electronically. Did you have a question? Or was that old? I'm going to say that was probably old. Okay, thank you so much to our SMEs. We appreciate your time tonight, and we appreciate you devoting your time to answering the questions of the committee. Okay, so our next agenda item is to hear from the data committee. So that's Daryl and Dia, if you guys would update us.
Happy to do so. Daryl, did you want to take the lead on this?
You're a bigger data nerd than me, so you go first.
Okay. Dueling geeks right now. So we had our second meeting of the data committee, and what we're in the process of doing is identifying at least 3 to 5 indicators per theme or issue that a committee has identified so far, so that we can really have a good definition of sort of what's at issue right now for the department. You know, we do hope to look at some pure city data if we can get it. It's a little harder, I think, than we certainly than I had anticipated. But we did a recent poll on hire data. So it looks like we just received a huge raw data set of about 1,494 records that date back to about 1971. In that data set are hire date, gender, and race. So we could get some kind of representative analysis from that. We are also interested in, I put a request in for EEOC claims. So we want to take a look at the claims. We've talked about trying to look at the training pools. And we need to go back to the training staff to pull that as well. So those are some of the data sets that we're looking at this minute for the workforce committee. And if there are other items, certainly, I definitely want to, tomorrow is just send the link for the data on use of force by gender and race and the race and gender of the suspect, the alleged suspect. So we can get that out. But if there are other pieces of data the committee would like, it'd be good to know now, since, we're really, you guys are ahead of the game. You've got your summary moving already. But if there are other data points, we'd love to know.
So I don't know if we have this or not. So pardon me if this is already in the shared drive. Do we have data around MNPD promotions trending 5 years, 8 years? So do we know the demographics around promotion? I think that would be helpful. Because I do take Reggie's point that if the pool is overloaded with white males, there are going to be very few opportunities to promote women or racial or ethnic minorities.
So what we really want to look at is the actual pools over a period of 8 years, not who made promotion. Is that correct? Okay.
No, I want to know who was actually promoted.
Okay.
Oh, you're muted, Margie.
And
thanks. So I want to know if those are mirroring the already the data in the police department, or if, in other words, 74% of the promotions are white males, which coincides with 74% of the police department being white males, or if it is even further skewed than that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's the single most important thing that you're drawing out a distinction about, which is benchmarking and visualization of the data. And the data committee is probably ready to strangle me because I keep sort of harping on this point, which is data without appropriate context or visualization is useless, especially for lay people. We can't take a very complicated profession and just go, oh, that's terrible, right? Well, it's terrible compared to what? And some of the premises that have been made are minority officers, whether it be female or ethnic minority, aren't promoting at the same rate. Is that okay? Is it true? A, and B, is that because white test takers are better test takers, or is the test biased? What's that about? So I caution everybody again about context to the data, because the data being produced by MNPD is such that use of force isn't an issue when benchmarked against other large departments. Again, that's my opinion. You can let the data speak for itself, but I'm worried that trying to come up with 5 KPIs to lay on the next chief without appropriate context is going to be challenging for them and frustrating for us. But more importantly, we're still having a data disconnect at the crossroads, because police work and police life is still very under wraps. And there's the data team's been working exceptionally hard to try to cull data from the Human Resources Department, and even they aren't really super excited about turning things over. There's always this sensitivity to privacy, but when you anonymize the data and you just tell me, okay, in the last 10 years, how many Black officers were hired, how many female officers were hired, how many Hispanic, right? Just break it down for me by gender and by race, show us the promotion rates, and then let's start understanding where the problem might be. Is it our hiring? Is it our testing? And, I don't know that we're going to get to those answers in the world as we know it today with the data that we have access to. But I think asking the question will push us into that horizon. But in the next 90 days, I don't know that it's going to be super helpful for the community or the chief. And that's what concerns me, because we're asking how good are we doing at what we're doing? Think about that really carefully. How good are we doing what we are doing, right? What is that we're doing and are we good at it? That has absolutely zero connection to the reality of life, which is what should you be doing, right? Are we sending men and women with guns and bats to handle mentally ill patients? Yes. Is that the right resource? Is that the right tool? No. Do the officers know it? Yes. Right? So there's a lot of internal and external things that need to happen before we start sort of overlaying this process with a lot of new KPIs and performance measures. And I've advocated to Dia and the team, and I've asked it to be forwarded to the city hall, which is we need an outside management audit. There's a lot of large firms that do that, and then we can be measuring our department with what they're doing against what they should be doing with benchmarking. And then the new chief would have a roadmap for success in leading the department, hiring for the department, testing and promoting within the department. There's a whole lot of things that could be answered. So there's a long-winded pitch for help me push the agenda of outside management audit, performance audit.
If I may, I do also just want to say that for all of us who've done strategic planning, that there's a very good opportunity for the department to do some very significant planning around what the data show. And if I may make the clarification, results-based accountability is not looking to establish a small set of KPIs so much as it's asking three questions. How much are we doing it? How well are we doing it? And who is better off? So the indicators, well, I absolutely agree, there's always going to be limitations in the data that we collect administratively, particularly if it's not being audited by an outside research arm. This is always true about any data set we get. It is an indicator of sorts. And I think that some of the data we have do show disproportionate impact. And I think that disproportionate impact is at the issue for the Policing Policy Commission, that it's incumbent upon us to really identify that. And so that's really the thought behind this. This is not a KPI process. And certainly, I think, KPIs help to understand where an industry stands, and eventually industries have to decide if that's appropriate. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, so I really like, Darryl, what you were saying, how we look at the data to see, what we're doing versus what we should be doing. And a lot of what I'm hearing is getting to a representation of 27% to represent our community. But everyone seems to be, that we've heard from so far, seems to be okay, that we are below 10% and that the highest that we've ever been is at 10%. So I'm hoping that this data can bear out the fact that what we have been doing is not good enough based on what we should be doing to get to a fair representation of our community.
I appreciate that, Mr. Harris. I think I want to let you guys know that the discussions that we've been having with the chairs, with the mayor's office, are around the idea that we may look beyond things like the CALEA standards, the PERF standards, which MNPD meets or exceeds. But I think it's a good time to ask whether or not those standards are where we want to be in policing. And if we make recommendations strongly on moving beyond some of these historically held standards, that's going to be okay. So I don't think we need to consider our recommendations in a box. I think we can think outside the box if we want to do that. And I don't think we need to hold ourselves to what have been historically held standards. I think that's what Daryl's kind of trying to say too. What should we be doing? Not, are we doing what has been previously held to be the standard?
That's my amplification. Thank you for bringing that, because the police, as we've seen in the last year to date, the environment for police work is changing, and how we value it and how we use that tool is much different. And one thing that stands out clearly is in a department this size that there hasn't been an outside audit, A, and B, it's truly lacking a strategic plan. And I think that strategic plan could be being felt by the rank and file officers, because the strategic plan hasn't put a value on diversity, hasn't put a value on promoting diversity, hasn't put a value on attracting and retaining diversity. And that can be measured both racially and gender. So to be a 21st century agency, and we know whether we want to or not, that's the direction police work is heading in. I think taking existing standards that we have today really are less helpful than they would have been this time last year. And I think we need to address that before we spend a lot of time, energy, and resources in charting a path based on those historical measurements. And that was what I was trying to amplify.
Agreed. Demetria.
Thank you. Just two sort of simple observations when I was going through all my notes this week. We're always talking about recruiting at the officer level. Do they never recruit command staff to get those numbers up where they need to be? And if so, why not? And when I looked at the use of force incidents in the last 5 years and years of service, it's all 7. 7.0, 7.1, 7. Is there a 7-year itch? Is there some retraining that needs to happen at 7 years? Because it seems more than just a coincidence that every use of force incident kind of congealed around 7 years. So just two observations that kind of jumped out.
I think that's a good observation. Dia, do you have anything statistically that you want to add to what Demetria just?
I noticed that as well, and I think that's a question that we can raise in the data committee is how is that data understood in the force?
Yeah, and I think Dia and I hate to, I don't mean to put words in her mouth, but she and I have had a conversation about, once we start to make recommendations, and I'm kind of moving into our next agenda items. But once we really start to hone in on what the recommendations are going to be, I do think we need to put in there as much specificity as we can agree on. If you look at Nashville, they're at about, what do we say, Dia, 55% white male?
Of the total population in Davidson County, 55% is white.
And so if you look at the Pew Research that I sent out, the military, for instance, I think has done a really good job of diversifying, although they lack a diversity in the upper ranks. Their rank and file are 56% white male. And so I think those are two pretty good data points, around a recommendation that we work towards in the next 3 to 5 years, benchmarks where we see the department start to turn, and the ultimate goal is that 55-ish%. Seems like a reasonable benchmark for us. I would like to know what the median age of the department is. So I'd love to know if we're looking at a young department, in which case it's going to be difficult for us to turn those numbers. Are we looking at a much older department that you're going to have a lot of officers retiring in the next 3 to 5 years? The median age within the department will tell us how quickly we can turn that. Can we turn it in 5 years, or is it going to take a decade to reach the benchmarks that we're going to recommend?
I'll add that to the list.
Does anybody have anything else for the data committee? Any other questions? Go ahead, Whitney.
I was wondering if you had any data, and forgive me if this is already in the files. President Smallwood mentioned that like 46% of officers are reprimanded in a year. I was wondering if there's any data describing like what those are for.
That data would be probably really challenging. It would be great data to dig into because that would help us impact more favorably the morale issues. But employee files are the holy grail of all police work, and you just can't get into them. I mean, that it would be such a unique study if we could anonymize that and understand those infractions, but I don't hold a lot of hope for that one.
Well, and I wrote down, yeah, he said 42% more disciplined than other police departments. So I don't know if he means, you know, it could be 20% are disciplined, but that is still 42% more than you see in other departments. So, and we can get some clarification from him on that.
I think he said a few years ago that happened.
I'll email him to see if we can get some clarification of what he meant there. So seeing no other questions for the data folks, let's move into a discussion with Eric and get a mayor's office update.
As of right now, there's nothing new on our plate on our end. Of course, as we've already discussed right now, that we do have Dwight Lewis, who is going to be our now new new co-chair over the PPC. So we're definitely happy to have him with that. Of course, our chairs and our vice chairs know about our meeting that's coming up on Wednesday to discuss. Beyond that, the only other thing that I would add is probably the brown bag presentation that's coming up this Thursday at 12 o'clock with Director Jill Fitchard, who will definitely make sure to talk about the work of the COB. And hopefully we'll have connections with all of the committees. So I did send out invites to everybody for that. So if you haven't had a chance, please do so. Just make sure to RSVP for that so that you'll have the link to be a part of that conversation. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I also have one update real quick, which is we have, as far as I know, it's the final brown bag, which will be this a week from this Thursday, October 8th. So it will take place on Thursday, October 8th at noon. And that is on trauma-informed approaches on law enforcement. And we have been able to secure Judge Sheila Calloway to talk about her transformation of the juvenile court. And we're delighted to have you, Madam Chair, as a speaker to talk about your experience in leading trauma-informed approaches in law enforcement. And we will also be joined by Jen Drake Croft, who is a director in the Tennessee Commission for Children and Youth, and she will talk about the whole sort of state initiative around trauma-informed approaches. And we'll have an invitation going out on that very shortly.
Madam Chair.
Great. Yes.
Real quick, Eric, did you get my email regarding the brown bag on the 1st?
I'll have to check for it and see. I probably did. I get some emails. I'll probably just respond and keep going. So I'll go back and look for it.
Thank you.
Great. I see that Jill has joined us on the call from the COB. I wonder, Jill, if you had any remarks you wanted to make while you're on the call with us.
Oh, hi. I didn't have anything to mention because I came in late, so I didn't get to hear anything. I apologize. But I do look forward to speaking with you all about the COB and policing culture on Thursday.
Great. Well, we appreciate you being here and welcome to the Workforce Committee meeting. Thank you for spending some time with us. Okay, so I would just like to open it up for a few minutes. I know we've been on for a long time. Any final thoughts? I think it's important that we start to get some of these. I know we put together kind of a skeleton, but I think it's important that we start to put some ideas and thoughts down on paper. If you have some thoughts or feelings about recommendations regarding the items in our bucket, could you please email those to Whitney and I so that we can start to put those down on a document and kind of toss those around amongst us. We've got a couple more weeks where we're going to talk to subject matter experts. Next Monday, we're going to hear from retired Lieutenant Colonel of the Colorado State Patrol, Brenda Leffler, and retired Minneapolis, Minnesota Police Chief Janae Harto. They're going to talk about fair and impartial policing. Brenda has been an instructor for a number of years with FIP, and Janae is going to talk about culture and challenges with regards to retention and promotion, as well as the Vitals Aware program, which allows for immediate communication to police officers around the issue of mental health and mental illness. And I think that will be a great discussion. The following week, Whitney, would you like to talk about what we're going to do the following week?
Yes, on October 12th, we will have a speaker from the Silent No Longer group, which, as you may have seen in the news, has been handling some of the sexual harassment, assault allegations against them in PD. And she'll be sharing some of the stories that she's collected. And I think it'll be incredibly informative, especially in describing the culture.
Yeah, I would just add that Mac had requested that we entertain subject matter expert testimony from the LGBTQ plus community. And so we are currently researching to see if we can bring somebody on to address us on the 12th as well around the LGBTQ plus relationship with the police department and the relationship and community outreach that goes on between MMPD and either the chamber or members of. And I look forward to that as well. Does anybody have any final thoughts about our meeting tonight or what the committee's doing in the next couple of weeks?
This is Dwight. I don't have any final thoughts or anything, but I just want to, there was an article in the New York Times yesterday on the front page. Some of you might have seen it. It's headlined, "A Quiet Retreat from Defund in Minneapolis." So you all might want to just take a look at that. It's in the New York Times on page 1 by Asted Herndon, Herndon.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
And thanks for letting me join you all tonight.
Yes, no, we welcome you and thank you so much for joining us. I'll try to find that article and send the link out to the committee. Gary, on the phone, do you have anything else? If he's still on the phone? Okay, any further business? Seeing none, we will adjourn tonight's meeting. See you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.